Dustin Baker, VikesNow. This is, what do we got? January 23rd edition. The 49ers, Eagles, Bengals, Chiefs have advanced to the conference championship weekend, and those are four teams the Vikings play. Yay! In 2023 because of a 13-4 spiffy record and a NFC North Division crown. The Vikings have a first place schedule. So much for making the most of the playoff opportunity, getting bounced by the Giants a week and change ago. Now you got a first place schedule that involves these teams that won and are presumably heading, well, two of them are heading to the Super Bowl, four going to the dance next Sunday. But to sort of put a bow again on the 2022 season, I want to do an autopsy of sorts of the good and the bad. Three things that particularly stand out that the Vikings did well in 2022, and then kind of talk about some of the implications going forward on those. And then, we got full off-season mode, so you're stuck with me for a little less than 8 months until regular season football begins again. So I will start with the good on the autopsy. I don't know if what the good would be called on an autopsy, but we're going to roll with it. So as you probably know, the single most important part of Minnesota's 13-4 season, or how they got there, was that they were fourth quarter gods. They ranked first in the NFL in points scored in the fourth quarter, and it was the most fourth quarter points per game in Vikings history. In terms of points score, there's never been a better offensive Vikings team in the fourth quarter in team history, and that goes back to 1961. And then they ranked second in efficiency, expected points added, EPA, and that's fourth quarter offense. And then even the defense, who'd have thunk it, played well in the fourth quarter. That ranked sixth in defensive EPA per play. So the single most reason that this purple team won the NFC North and had that fancy 11-0 record in one-score games was because they showed up in the fourth quarter in almost every game, of course, except for the Giants game. At least they didn't close that one out. But yeah, if this would have been a run-of-the-mill Vikings team from years past, they wouldn't be able to get away with the shit that they did in the first, second, third quarter. Played decent average in the fourth quarter. Otherwise, you guessed it would have been about a 9-8 season. But on both sides of the ball, a very good omen for a first-year head coach and the future. They stepped on the gas in the fourth quarter and, scored more points than anybody. And then the defense actually usually stiffened, and voila, you have a 13-4 record. So I think Kwesi Adofo-Mensah calls it situational masters. That's fine. That worked. I know they said they wanted to be that going into the season. And truth be told, when you look at the 2020 Vikings or 2021 Vikings, who were on defense actually faster, maybe not better, but younger, it felt like most of the time that's what was separating the team from being a playoff team, was collapsing in the final moments of a half, second quarter, fourth quarter. And then Kevin O'Connell comes along, nips that in the bud for the most part, and then they win, 5 more games than they did last year. So they preached that situational master stuff, and then they delivered. They just didn't do it in the wild card round of the postseason. So the top thing, if you're shutting off the show after this, is that in the fourth quarter, both sides of the ball tended to rise up, and that mattered. That propelled them to an NFC North crown. Next one is low penalties. Now, I know because 2021 went pear-shaped with penalties, we tend to think like, oh, this was rotten. But during the Zimmer era, from 2014 until 2020, the Vikings were a very disciplined team that habitually ranked low in penalties. Then out of nowhere, nobody knows why, in 2021 it regressed. They ended up being ranked third worst in flags and penalties, infractions in 2021. Well, kind of like the fourth quarter stuff, Kevin O'Connell came along and fixed that. In 2022, the Vikings had the league's fifth least penalties, and when you're playing a bonanza of one-score games, low penalties matter, emphatically. And in fact, most of the time, teams are penalized out the wazoo. They don't make it far out of the regular season or in the postseason. I think of back to last year, when the Cowboys lost the 49ers in 2021. Cowboys team was pretty damn good, but they ranked either last or second to last in penalties. And then that wild card game in 2021, The Cowboys got penalized like fiends, and San Francisco won. So when you have this very slim margin for error or on the scoreboard, the way that the Vikings conducted business over and over again, you have to keep those penalties low. Otherwise, you're not going to end up with a 13-4 record. It's going to be knocked down to 11-6 or 10-7. So just like the fourth quarter situational masters mantra, having low penalties in a player's coach's first year, a likable guy, it's encouraging that he's doing something right behind the scenes to encourage a low penalty total. All right, the next one you're going to like is the chunk play on offense. Chunk plays on offense. A little known fact about the 2021 season, Zimmer's last season, is that the Vikings led the NFL in gains of 25 yards or more. Just didn't really feel like it, or people didn't give a shit because they finished 8-9. Well, Mr. O'Connell came along and for the most part kept the status quo. The Vikings ranked third in offensive gains of 10 yards or more, fifth in plays of 15 yards or more, and then ninth in 50-plus yard gains, and I think 10th in 40-plus yard gains. And this, so what is it? This is a Justin Jefferson stat. You can just stamp that right on it and then, move on. This is a thank you to the guy who's about to be the highest paid wide receiver in the business. This is a Justin Jefferson stat. The Vikings found ways to get chunk plays more so than the most, and that made up for some of the demons on defense. And I'm with you. So a lot of times it didn't feel like they were high-flying, just throwing the ball up for Jefferson to, make plays on bombs down the field. But I believe that the reason it didn't feel like that is because the lack of production at WR2 and to a degree WR3. In those games where Jefferson was clamped, the Vikings were kaput. Aside from this Giants game when TJ Hawkinson got in the mix, if Jefferson was neutralized, so were the Vikings. But on the whole, Jefferson usually wasn't neutralized, which is why he damn near had 2,000 yards. The chunk plays were there on offense, and that's meaningful in history of the NFL, and then especially in 2022 when the focus, it seems everywhere you look, is offense, offense, offense. So those are the items that they can carry over into 2022, maintain or improve, is that fourth quarter supremacy. That's the only reason they were as good as they were. Low penalties, kind of unexpected. If you would have asked me 5 months ago how are the Vikings going to rank in penalties, I'd say middle of the pack. Let's hope for middle of the pack with a first-year head coach who doesn't seem like a big disciplined guy. Somehow it worked. Fifth lowest per penalty yards in the NFL. And then the chunk plays. They didn't really get too many rushing the football. We'll talk about that momentarily. But through the air and then on the whole, on offense, the big plays were there. All right, the causes of death in the autopsy. The first, beyond the shadow of a doubt, is the defense, and that is why a new defensive coordinator will be coming through those doors in Egan relatively soon. I think right now they've interviewed or will interview Brian Flores, who's this guy's favorite pick for the job. Sean Desai, I'm probably saying that last name wrong, forgive me. And then Ryan Nielsen, the co-defensive coordinator for the Saints. They got a real cool young pool of the guys to choose from. Probably the pendulum swinging back from Ed Donatel, who is 65. So yeah, it sounds like you'll probably get a young guy defensive coordinator and try it out. Why not? You tried the old guy thing and look where it got you. 27th in defensive DVOA, 28th in points allowed to opponents, 31st in yards allowed, and then when I talk about chunk gains on offense, well, they ranked second to last in the NFL in surrendering yards of 15-plus plays or more on defense. So no matter how you dress this up, I know that it feels weird to indict an entire side of the ball when you just had a 13-4 record, but somehow this team could have been even better, probably got further in the postseason if it had an average or good defense. Turnovers deodorized over and over all of the defensive sins of the 2022 Vikings, and bless their heart, that's a token kudos to them. They deserve praise. But when turnovers did not flood into the box score, the Vikings lost, plain and simple. I believe they were 12-1 when they forced at least one turnover, and 1-3 when they did not. So there was this outrageous and outlandish discrepancy between if the Vikings didn't force turnovers, stick a fork in them. They were done. The only game where they didn't and they won was the Patriots game, and they probably won that one because of was it Hunter Henry? Which tight end was that for the Patriots? Where they had the goal line review and, kind of thought it was going to stand and it was overturned. That was probably the reason they ended up winning that game, if you care now. But the defense is, as much as it felt like in the Washington game and then the Buffalo game, that, all right, it's getting better, it's going in the right direction, it didn't. It ended up getting worse. I know Dalvin Tomlinson was hurt there for a while, and then they played Carousel at cornerback. But it's in retrospect, and then even living in the moment when you watched it with your eye test, this defense was not good. It evidently is going to take a long time to switch to a 3-4, or you go find some of that juju that the Cowboys had in 2020. In 2020, their defense was crap, and then they used the draft to get Micah Parsons. They went and got Dan Quinn, and within 1 year, they went from the bottom of the NFL, I think they were in the 23rd to 24th, so bad and not good, into a top 3 bunch with Dan Quinn and Micah Parsons rising to power like that. So it's precedent. This can be done. This can be fixed. It's just that, with an offense first, young offense first head coach, do you really trust him to fix the defense? Well, he better get a brilliant mind to do it. Because this defense was no good. I tried to convince myself for a long time that it's opportunistic and they're 9-2 for a reason. It was all bullshit. The defense was never very good. It couldn't tackle, and several dudes just decided that they were slow in the snap of 2 fingers. All right, the next one is the rushing futility. This one could probably generate controversy because it sounds like I am advocating for establish the run, baby. No, not really. I enjoy how much the Vikings threw the football. However, they ran the ball 3rd least in the league. And usually, when you can't dictate terms and run the football, at least in spots in football games, you don't have a very good football team. And if you look at the upside-down nature of that parity between run and pass, you need more balance, plain and simple. You don't have to be a run-first offense. You don't have to just give it to Dalvin Cook and run into the middle of the offensive line and just do that until you're beating a head against the wall. But historically, now and probably forever, you have to be able to run the ball at times to finish out games. And it helps with time of possession, what I'm going to talk about here in a minute. So they ran the ball the 3rd least, and then when they actually did run the ball, they ranked 26th in yard per rush. This is a recipe for doomsday. You have to, at some points, if you don't want to run the ball, fine. But when you do it, you've got to be effective. And the Vikings didn't do either one of those things. It's probably because Dalvin Cook either was hurt or hit a wall at age, 27, which would be, pretty early for him to be washed. But going into this thing in August, I remember talking about one of the strongest parts on the depth chart was Dalvin Cook, Alexander Mattison, Ty Chandler, and Kene Nwangu. What did it get you? It got you very few rushing attempts, and when they did run the ball, it was mostly futile. So I don't know what the plan is, but I hope when they do their self-evaluations, look into their souls, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell, I hope they realize that, we don't have to run first. You can still throw the ball a lot, but there are some times where you do run the rock, and then that's how you win. And they need to kind of get that in their DNA. I don't care who it's with. It'll probably be some hodgepodge of Ty Chandler and Nwangu and some other guy by committee, would be my guess. But the rushing enterprise for the Vikings, which we're not used to, was not very good. And just these little glimpses of why the team didn't succeed, this is one of them. Finally, this one we didn't really talk about much because it didn't seem to matter when you have a big fat-ass record like 11-2 or whatever it was, is the time of possession. The Vikings ranked 26th in the NFL, so that is 7th worst in the league in time of possession. O'Connell prefers this up-tempo even on the first drive of the game. They're rushing to the huddle. Cousins is doing his Peyton Manning thing, calling out audibles, and then they snap the ball with blah, blah, blah seconds remaining on the game clock. To a degree, that's fine, but when you have an upside-down time of possession split like the 2022 Vikings did, that means you need your defense out on the field more often. And do you really want that defense on that field more often? No, because it didn't tackle, it's old, and it flat out wasn't good. So by speeding up the pace of the game, going up tempo, not running the football, you are putting the game in the defense's hands more than you like. And there could be some causation here where the Vikings' time of possession was so bad and therefore that's why the defense wasn't very good. I guess you could make that case. But you need to find balance, and that's running the football better than you usually do. Not advocating for a full-blown Zimmer run-first offense, but when you run it, you got to be successful. What does that do? It chews up the clock, and then that shitty defense I talked about 5 minutes ago, onus isn't put on them as much, and it all feeds into the time of possession. So that's that. That's the good of the autopsy. Fourth quarter gods, very low penalties. Chunk plays on offense remained thanks to Justin Jefferson. And then the causes of death, number one with the bullet was the defense. It's kind of a good thing that the Giants had their way with the Vikings on defense because it cannot be ignored this offseason, nor is it because the defensive coordinator got the axe. But I think I tweeted and maybe said on this show, had the Vikings lost by a missed field goal from Greg Joseph from 38 yards or some shit like that, that guy, whoever it was, that guy would have been blamed. Probably Joseph, or if it got down to on offense and Cousins' pass fell incomplete in the end zone to Adam Thielen or something, then you'd look at Cousins in the offense saying, how can we get better? But there was no sugarcoating that the defense was the culprit against the Giants, and therefore reform is on the way. Rushing futility, you got to be able to run the ball, or, if you don't want to, when you do, you have to get more than 4-something yards per carry that they got, which ranked 26th in the NFL. And then all of that feeds into time of possession. I hope that we look up at this little stat metric 9, 10 months from now, and I'm like, oh, boom, the Vikings rank 11th in time of possession. That will indicate that there is more balance on offense, and then the defense isn't expected to do as much on the field. That is the Vikings 2022 autopsy. I'll be back tomorrow, probably talking about defensive coordinators and the possibilities unless news breaks. Then we talk about the new guy. And then Wednesday with Josh Fry and so forth. And that's all I got. Skol, baby.